Hi, welcome to Chess 24/7, and you are encountering another chess video, not just blitz video, but chess video. Normally you see me playing chess blitz games, but today it's not the case because today I'm doing a video on how to improve your chess. Okay, so first thing first, what all topics would I be covering in this section will be the question that would be arising in your mind right now. So for this specific section I would be covering a very eminent book known as How to Reassess Your Chess by Jeremy Silman. I'm sure you all must be aware of this book, and this book is a must-have book for every chess player. So in this video I'll be giving you a succinct idea of what the book is all about. But let's start with the very basics about the book. The book is written by Jeremy Silman, and the book aims to make the concept of imbalance lucid to amateurs like you and me. So by the term imbalance, Jeremy Silman means the difference that occurs in the two different positions, in the two different teams on chessboard. It doesn't mean that your position is bad or not. It just means the difference that every chess game possesses. So let's begin with the imbalances. According to Jeremy Silman, there are 7 imbalances that occur in every game of chess, and the imbalances are space, minor piece, initiative or tempo, pawn structure, material, file, and development. Each imbalance would be having a separate video in this section so that I could make the topic of imbalance more lucid to you. But for this video I will be giving you a succinct idea of each and every chess imbalance. Okay, so the first imbalance is space. By the term space, Jeremy Silman means to say that the number of squares that your pawn has covered, or in other words, we can say that the squares that are behind your pawn. For example, with the move e4 to e5, white aims to grab some space in the center, and with the move e5, black also aims to grab some space in the center. And the advantage of having space is that you can easily move your pieces, you can easily maneuver your pieces in the space that you own. I'll try to inculcate the concept of space by a fictitious game that I have created for this purpose only. Let's say I'm playing with white pieces and I play e4 and my opponent plays e5, French defense. Now we can clearly see that white has covered more space in the center, and he continues to do so with the move d4. And after d5 we have French defense, and for this purpose we'll go for the advanced variation with the move e5. After the move c5 and c3, we can clearly see the enormous space that white possesses. We can clearly see that the white pawns have covered more space than the black pawns. So we can clearly see that white enjoys advantage in space. But it doesn't mean that having an advantage in space will always lead you to win the game. It just means that you have advantage in space and your opponent doesn't have advantage in space. It's just an imbalance that Jeremy Silman always talk about in this book. So now we'll move on to the next imbalance, that is minor piece. By the imbalance of minor pieces, Jeremy means to say that the counterplay that exists between the bishops and the knights. Minor pieces are bishops and knights only. Well, if we look about the worth of each piece, both the pieces, that is the bishops and the knights, are worth 3 pawns, but it depends on the situation that whether your knight is better than your bishop pair or not. For example, we'll see a fictitious position in just a second that will help you to understand what I'm trying to say. In the position that's right in front of you, we can clearly see that white possesses knight pair and black possesses bishop pair. Although in this game, white is having a upper hand in the game because the position is closed and the bishops cannot do anything. In other words, we can say that whenever the position is closed, knights turn out to be better than the bishops, and the opposite case will be when the board is totally clear, when there are no pawns in the center of the board. Bishops turn out to be very effective than knights. The reason is bishops likes open diagonals and knights like closed positions because knights can jump over different pieces. Moving on to the next imbalance, it's of imbalance of initiative. Initiative or tempo means a move by which your opponent has to move his pieces or has to react to your moves. Example of initiative can be the very famous Scandinavian defense flag, which occurs after white plays e4, d5, e takes d5, queen takes d5, knight takes c3, and on this move white has gained an initiative because he is hitting the white queen and the white queen has to move. Although in turn black can gain the initiative back by playing his queen to e5 check, and after bishop to e2, knight to f6, knight to f3, now white has again gained a tempo because it's hitting the queen again. Queen g5, castles, knight c6, a3, knight e5, and d4, and here white gains another tempo because the bishop on c1 is hitting the queen on g5 and the knight is also hit. The knight on e5 is also hit, so one of the piece has to fall. Moving on, the next type of imbalance is of pawn structure. Pawn structure is a very comprehensive concept as it includes a lot of things such as double pawns, isolated pawns, weak squares, holes, etc, etc, and all these things will be explained in a separate video where I'll be discussing only about the pawn structure, but in this video I'll be giving you a brief idea about what pawn structure is and what all basic things it includes. So the first thing that a pawn structure includes is the pawn chain. Pawn chain is the chain that you possess by the formation of your pawns. In this case, white has a pawn structure towards the king side, and the pawn on e5 is the strongest pawn because it is protected by the pawn on d5, and the loose pawn or the weak pawn of this pawn chain is the pawn on b2 because it's not protected by any other piece. So if black is going to attack the pawn chain, is going to attack the b2 pawn because it is the weak pawn, and once b2 falls, c3 will fall, so d4, and then e5 will also fall, and the whole pawn chain will collapse. The next pawn structure is double pawns. Double pawns have their advantages and disadvantages. The advantage of having double pawn is that they cover a lot of space. They cover 5 squares on the board, and you can clearly see I'm highlighting those 5 squares. In another words, we can say that double pawns covers huge space. But another disadvantage of having double pawn is that in this case the pawn on d4 is weak because it is not protected by any other piece, and it can be attacked by the opponent's piece. So these are the advantages and disadvantages of double pawn structure. The next structure that I would like to talk about would be isolated pawns. Isolated pawns are not favorable as they are not protected by the adjacent pawns. In this case, the pawn on e5 is an isolated pawn because it's not protected by the pawn on d6 or on f6. Isolated pawns can become a target of attack, and in many games we have seen that the fight is about capturing an isolated pawn. Isolated pawn requires a queen or king or any other piece to protect it, otherwise it will collapse. Another pawn structure is the double isolated pawns. In this case, the pawn on e4 and e5 are considered to be double isolated pawns, and they are one of the most extremely dangerous pawn structures. And the problem with this pawn structure is that none of the pawns are protecting each other, and if the opponent can capitalize on this fact, he can easily win both of these pawns. The last pawn structure that I will be discussing today in this brief video about pawn structure would be the pass pawns. Pass pawns means the pawns which have no enemy pawns in front of them. In this case, the pawn on e5 and d4 have no pawns in front of them, and thus they become pass pawns. And these are quite advantageous because now it's very easy for the white side to proceed them to the other side of the board and queen them. The next imbalance is of imbalance of material, and I think it's needless to say that imbalance of material means that your opponent might possess more pieces than you, or you might possess more pieces than your opponent. For example, in this case, the white side has a queen, but his opponent has two rooks and a passed pawn, so it will be quite difficult for the white side to win this game. The next imbalance is of imbalance of file. Imbalance of file means that either you or your opponent possess great control over an open file. For example, in this case, white possesses enormous control over the open f file. With his queen on f1, rook on f2 and f3, he possesses great amount of control going over the f file. Although black also has rooks on f6 and f7, but the queen on g8 cannot come to f8 because of the bishop on h6. Thus, we can say that at this stage, white possesses great amount of control over the f file and can win a piece anytime he wants to. The next and the last type of imbalance is of development. Development means the process by which you bring out your pieces into game and provide them some play. For example, in this case, e4, after e4 and e5, knight f3 is played, developing a minor piece. d6, protecting the pawn on e5 but is a passive move. Bishop c4, developing another minor piece. h6 is another passive move and is played to avoid any knight to g5 stuff. Knight c3, developing another minor piece. Bishop to g4. Finally, black develop its first piece, but it's too late now. After knight takes e5, if the bishop takes the queen on d1, the white bishop can take the pawn on f7 with check, king e7 and knight d5 is checkmate. All the escape squares are guarded by the white pieces, and it all was possible because of two reasons. First, white's enormous development lead, and another and the most obvious reason was the passive moves played by black. So these were the 7 imbalances. I will be posting a separate video for each imbalance. Hope you liked my introductory video about the imbalance and the idea of creating a playlist where you can learn on how to improve your chess. See you in my next video. Till then, goodbye, good day.